Welcome to the John Cady Podcast. I'm John Cady, U.S. Navy retired, former minister. In the last few days, I have been following various discussions over the topic of purity culture, modesty, dress codes within various churches and religious organizations, and most importantly, what has occurred to me to be a very glaring double standard in the way these teachings are imposed upon men and women who attend these churches. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how when abuse happens, whether it's in a relationship or within the church itself, why is it always the women who get blamed, whether it was their fault or not? And I'm going to spoil it right here. The vast majority of these cases, the women are not at fault. But yet, when it happens, they're blamed, shamed, and shown the door, while the people who abuse them still continue in ministry and still continue doing what they're doing, furthering the cycle on and on and on. A little bit about my own story of dress codes and stuff in the church. In my young adult years, I was in my mid-20s, I became a member of a non-denominational church based out of Waukegan, Illinois. They are now in Norfolk, Virginia. I was in the Navy at the time. They were a breakaway congregation from the United Pentecostal Church. When we talked about dress codes for men, a lot of times I was dealing with this from the man's perspective because I was at that time affiliated with the single men's ministry in this church. We were imposed a lot of dress standards. We couldn't go to church in jeans and a t-shirt, though I personally got away with it because with me being in the military, it was harder to impose that as opposed to civilian brethren who were more active and present on a daily basis. But still, they wanted us to be dressed to the nines, at least the best way we could, for the services. We also couldn't wear shorts in public for basically the same reason why other churches impose these same teachings on women. They imposed it on men, and they even talked about we couldn't walk around wearing tank tops, or if the sun got real hot, some of us guys would be inclined to take our shirts off because it was hot and trying to beat the heat a little bit. Mixed bathing, which is what they called going to a public swimming pool, was also frowned upon. What did this do? Did this really enhance any holiness? Looking back on it and having been to public swimming pools in the past before I joined this church and years later since I left, yes, people dress differently to go swimming. That's a given. But the vast majority of people are not there ogling each other, drooling over each other, lusting after each other. Some of these claims that were made from the pulpit were definitely exaggerated. Some of the Pentecostal churches that I've come in contact with took things to an even greater extreme. That one particular minister who had an online presence until his passing earlier this year talked about at length that men couldn't even wear short-sleeve shirts or t-shirts. Neckties were a no-no because he called the necktie a cloth necklace. Personally, a necktie is more of a fashion nuisance than anything else. It's not a sin issue or a heaven or hell issue. I don't particularly care for them. But in professional settings, wearing a necktie with a button-down collared shirt gives a more professional appearance as opposed to the religious significance that is brought up. The church I went to also was lenient on facial hair only to the point where men were allowed to wear mustaches, which was no big deal for me because I was in the Navy and uniform regulations wouldn't let me wear a beard anyway, so mustache was perfectly fine. But in the main Pentecostal community, more often than not, facial hair was frowned upon. Now, was facial hair based on biblical teaching, or was it based on cultural mores of the times? I found out that much of the argument about men not being allowed to wear facial hair when they're on the platform and when they're preaching stemmed from not biblical teachings, but from the culture of the 1960s and the 1970s. A lot of the ministers back then associated facial hair with the hippie culture, the counterculture movement of that era. That has since gone by the wayside. We don't see that many hippies anymore, and this is 2025. Why do they still do it? Because they have failed to realize that the times have changed. people are more lenient about facial hair. It's not a big deal anymore. I have facial hair. I have a mustache. I've got a small beard. So from the man's perspective, yes, we were imposed certain things, though definitely not to the same extent that we have seen imposed upon women in the church. My God, I mean, I step into a Pentecostal church at any given moment, and it's like the poor ladies, they can't wear makeup, they can't wear pants, they can't wear jewelry, though there are loopholes that they kind of work around, depending on, like, if you're the pastor's wife, and I've seen that on plenty of occasions. But a lot of these poor ladies, and they're precious ladies, precious sisters in the Lord, who are trying to do the right thing, but yet they don't understand why they're being imposed such strict teachings as opposed to their male counterparts. When it comes to the subject of women being the victims of abuse, and I won't go into the details on the different types of abuse, let's just say that sometimes it's a criminal-related offense. And when women and girls are victims of these issues, more often than not, the question's brought up, well, what were you wearing? And I used to subscribe to this, thanks to the teachings of the founding pastor of the church I attended, who later got caught doing things he shouldn't have been doing, and thankfully he went to prison for it. But he used to preach from the pulpit how women, if they were SA'd by somebody and it was brought up that they were wearing something revealing, that he would have said to the judge, well, she shouldn't have been out there teasing that man the way she was dressed. And in my ignorance, I blindly followed that ideology. As time went on, I realized just how fatally flawed it really is, because the mindset of men who do these offenses against women and girls, they don't care if the woman is fully clothed or if she's hardly wearing anything. Just because a woman is dressed in a certain fashion does not mean she's asking for trouble. No, this is one of the fatal flaws in the church that we don't teach, and that is we don't teach the men and boys how to properly guard their minds and guard their hearts and not let their urges get the better of them. And then when girls and women become victims of this type of abuse and type of criminal behavior, we need to listen to them and focus more on restoring the victims and letting them know that they are still loved and they are still part of the church and part of the community, rather than, well, you just brought shame to the gospel because of what happened. No, that poor woman didn't bring shame to the gospel. That sorry preacher who was out there doing things that he shouldn't have been doing brought shame to the gospel, because not only did he do what he did, but also his little circle of enablers has kept it going and going and going. And until that changes, the cycle of abuse will continue. I firmly believe that churches need to do a far better job on holding their pastors and ministers accountable for when they break the law and when they abuse their pulpit, abuse their position, and harm others, especially women, girls, young boys, and children in general. It's just wrong, and it needs to change. So I applaud those who are speaking out, those who are speaking against some of these outdated teachings. Modesty is more than just a dress code. It's also a mindset. And the vast majority of women, regardless of how they may dress outwardly, behave more modestly than we give them credit. And at the same time, a lot of men seem to just let their minds wandering into places where they shouldn't, into forbidden territory. This is John Cady. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you do, hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you on the next one.